The English king stood beneath a banner that would not survive the day. Around him, the shield wall still held. For hours, Norman cavalry had climbed the slope and fallen back. Arrows had struck wood, iron, flesh, and earth. Horses had recoiled from axes. Men had stumbled over bodies where the ground narrowed beneath the English line. Rumors had moved through the attacking army that William of Normandy was dead, forcing the Duke to reveal his face and ride before his soldiers to prove that the invasion had not lost its leader. But the battle continued. On the ridge, Harold Godwinson and the army of England remained between William and the crown he had crossed the Channel to claim. The English had survived the first assaults. Their defensive formation had resisted archers, infantry, and mounted knights. If they could remain together until darkness, William's invasion might fail before it had truly begun. Then the line started to break. Some English warriors pursued retreating Normans down the slope. Whether every withdrawal was deliberately staged or whether genuine panic was later turned into strategy remains debated, but the effect was deadly. Small gaps opened. The shield wall thinned. Norman forces turned on the pursuers. The battle that had been held in one solid line became a series of smaller struggles. By evening, Harold was dead. His brothers were dead. The English army was collapsing. And a foreign duke stood on the field with the road to England's throne open before him. The Battle of Hastings, fought on October 14, 1066, was not merely a change of kings. England had experienced conquest, invasion, dynastic conflict, and Scandinavian rule before. Nor did William control the entire kingdom the moment Harold fell. Rebellions would continue. Northern England would resist. Rival claimants remained. Norman power would have to be imposed through castles, confiscation, violence, political replacement, and years of campaigning. But Hastings made all of that possible. It destroyed the only English army capable of stopping William at the coast. It killed the crowned king and much of the political leadership surrounding him. It allowed a Norman elite to replace most of the old English aristocracy. It redirected England toward northern France, transformed its language of government, remade landholding, strengthened castle warfare, and placed the kingdom inside a new continental political world. Hastings did not simply decide who wore the crown. It changed what England would become. Our knowledge of the battle comes from sources created in a world of competing claims. Several versions of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle preserve English perspectives, although their accounts are brief and shaped by regional concerns. Norman writers such as William of Poitiers and William of Jumièges defended William's legitimacy and presented the conquest as lawful or divinely favored. The Bayeux Tapestry, technically an embroidery rather than a woven tapestry, offers the most famous visual narrative of the crisis, invasion, and battle. It is extraordinarily valuable, but it is not neutral. It was almost certainly created in a Norman-controlled environment and presents a story in which Harold's oath and William's claim are central. The sources disagree on motives, promises, troop numbers, and details of Harold's death. The broad outcome is clear. England faced several claimants in 1 year. Harold defeated one invasion in the north. William landed in the south. And at Hastings, the kingdom lost its king before it could recover from the First War. To understand the battle, we have to begin with a death without an heir. Edward the Confessor, King of England, died in January 1066. He had ruled for more than 2 decades, but left no surviving child. His death opened a succession crisis because early medieval kingship did not always pass automatically to the nearest relative. Bloodline mattered, but so did political support, military power, royal designation, and approval by the leading men of the kingdom. Several men could claim some right to the throne. Harold Godwinson was the most powerful nobleman in England. He was Earl of Wessex and the leading member of the Godwin family, whose lands, wealth, and connections dominated much of the kingdom. Harold had military experience and support among the English elite. According to English tradition, Edward entrusted the kingdom to him shortly before death. The Witan, the assembly of leading nobles and churchmen, recognized Harold, and he was crowned quickly. From an English political perspective, his accession was practical and defensible. But across the Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, claimed that the throne had been promised to him. William was related to Edward through Edward's Norman family connections. Edward had spent years in Normandy before becoming King of England, and Norman influence had existed at his court. Norman sources insisted that Edward had designated William as heir. They also claimed that Harold, during a journey to Normandy, had sworn an oath supporting William's succession. The circumstances of that oath remain uncertain. The Bayeux Tapestry shows Harold placing his hands on sacred relics, turning the oath into the moral center of the Norman case. To William's supporters, Harold had accepted an obligation and then violated it by taking the crown. To Harold's supporters, William was a foreign ruler using a disputed promise to justify invasion. No surviving evidence allows the succession question to be resolved as cleanly as either side wanted. What mattered was that both men had power enough to act. William began preparing an invasion. Before we continue, consider subscribing to Ashes of Empire. It helps this channel grow and helps us keep improving the quality of these forgotten war documentaries. William's preparations were an extraordinary logistical achievement. Normandy alone did not provide every soldier in his army. The promise of land, wealth, religious legitimacy, and military opportunity attracted warriors from Brittany, Flanders, Maine, and other parts of northern France. William assembled ships, horses, weapons, food, armor, and men for a major cross-channel invasion. Transporting cavalry was especially difficult. Horses had to be loaded onto ships and delivered in condition to fight after landing. William also sought religious support. Later, Norman tradition emphasized a papal banner and approval for the expedition, presenting the invasion as punishment for Harold's broken oath. Papal involvement strengthened William's ability to recruit and gave the conquest a sacred justification. The campaign could be described not simply as one ambitious duke attacking another kingdom, but as the enforcement of a rightful claim. Legitimacy mattered because William did not intend only to raid England, he intended to rule it. Across the North Sea, another claimant was preparing his own invasion. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, claimed the English crown through earlier agreements and Scandinavian dynastic history. He was one of the most formidable warriors of the age, with a career that had taken him through Scandinavia, Rus lands, and service in the Byzantine world. He was joined by Tostig Godwinson, Harold's exiled brother, who had been driven from his earldom after rebellion against his rule in Northumbria. England therefore faced threats from both north and south. Harold gathered forces along the southern coast, expecting William. But maintaining an army in the field was expensive and difficult. The English military system depended partly on the fired, levied men whose service could not continue indefinitely. As summer passed without a Norman landing, Harold released some forces and returned to London. Then Hardrada and Tostig struck in the north. Their army defeated the northern earls Edwin and Morcar at the Battle of Fulford near York on September 20th. York submitted, and the Norwegian invasion appeared close to success. Harold responded with remarkable speed. He moved north with his household troops and whatever forces he could gather. On September 25th, he surprised Hardrada's army at Stamford Bridge. The Norwegians were defeated. Hardrada was killed. Tostig died with him. The invasion from Scandinavia collapsed in one violent day. Stamford Bridge was a major English victory. It was also an exhausting beginning to the crisis. While Harold was in the north, William crossed the Channel. The Norman fleet landed at Pevensey on September 28th and then moved to Hastings. William established a fortified base, gathered supplies, and began devastating the surrounding region. This was not random destruction. The lands around Hastings were connected to Harold's own power base. By burning and taking resources, William supplied his army, provoked Harold, and made clear that delay would be paid for by English communities. Harold received the news and turned south. The traditional account describes the English army racing through hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks, exhausted by the northern campaign. Recent interpretations have questioned how much of the journey was made by road, and whether Harold used ships for part of the movement. The exact mechanics remain debated. What is certain is that he had little time to rest, rebuild, and gather the full military strength of the kingdom. He reached London and began assembling another army. Some advisors may have urged him to wait. Reinforcements could arrive. William's army might be contained, denied supplies, or worn down. Harold had already fought one major battle within weeks. His brothers Gurth and Leofwine were present, and the English leadership could not afford another catastrophic loss. Yet waiting carried danger. William was ravaging Harold's lands and consolidating his position. Every day allowed the Normans to strengthen fortifications and gather information. Harold may have hoped to surprise William before the invasion force was fully established. He may also have felt that a crowned king could not allow a foreign army to destroy his country without immediate response. He moved toward Hastings. William's scouts discovered the approach. The possibility of surprise disappeared. The armies met near the place now called Battle, northwest of Hastings. Harold positioned his forces on elevated ground, traditionally identified with Senlac Hill. The English formed a shield wall across the ridge. This was the core of their defense. Men standing close together, shields overlapping or aligned, presenting a dense barrier of wood, iron, spears, swords, and axes. The English army fought primarily on foot. At its center were the housecarls, professional retainers serving Harold and other nobles. Many carried the two-handed Danish axe, a weapon capable of delivering devastating blows against men and horses. Alongside them stood members of the Fyrd, drawn from the kingdom's local military obligations. Their quality, armor, and experience varied. Some were well-equipped. Others likely carried simpler protection and weapons. The English appear to have had relatively few archers. William's army was more tactically diverse. He had archers and crossbowmen, infantry, and mounted knights. Norman warfare placed greater emphasis on cavalry than the English system did. William could combine missile attack, infantry pressure, and mounted assault. But cavalry alone could not simply ride through a strong shield wall on elevated ground. Horses would not willingly charge into an unbroken mass of shields, spears, and axes without disorder first being created. The battle would depend on whether the English could remain together. The numbers are unknown. Medieval sources give figures too large to trust, and modern estimates vary widely. William may have commanded somewhere around 7,000 to 12,000 men. Harold's force may have been of a similar size or somewhat smaller. What matters is that neither army possessed an overwhelming numerical advantage that made the outcome inevitable. William had tactical variety. Harold had terrain and a strong defensive formation. The battle began in the morning. Norman archers moved forward first, firing uphill. Their initial volleys appear to have had limited effect. Shooting against higher ground reduced range and impact, while the English shield wall provided protection. Without many English archers returning fire, Norman bowmen also had fewer enemy arrows to collect and reuse. Infantry then attacked. They climbed the slope and met the shield wall at close range. The fighting became brutal. English axes could split shields, armor, and the legs of horses. Norman spears and swords struck at gaps. Men on both sides fought within the pressure of tightly packed formations. Then William's cavalry advanced. Mounted knights offered speed, height, and shock, but the English line did not break. Horses fell, riders were dragged down. The slope weakened the momentum of the charge. The shield wall absorbed the assault. On the Norman left, forces associated with Brittany began to retreat. The cause is uncertain. They may have been genuinely broken by the English defense. The withdrawal spread fear, and rumors circulated that William had been killed. In medieval battle, the apparent death of a commander could destroy an army. Personal leadership held forces together. If William was dead, the invasion had no clear future. The Duke responded directly. He raised or removed his helmet so his men could see his face. He rode among them, showing that he was alive and calling them back into order. The Norman retreat slowed. English warriors, seeing the enemy fleeing, pursued downhill. This was the first serious crack in Harold's defensive plan. The shield wall worked only while it remained a wall. The men who chased the Bretons abandoned the protection of the ridge and entered open combat. The Normans turned. Cavalry and infantry surrounded the pursuers. Many Englishmen were killed before they could return to the line. Whether William immediately recognized the possibility of repeating this pattern is uncertain. Later sources describe deliberate feigned retreats used to draw more English warriors out of formation. Some historians accept that the Normans employed the tactic. Others caution that chroniclers may have transformed genuine withdrawals into planned maneuvers to protect the image of Norman discipline. The distinction matters less than the result. Over the course of the day, the English line was weakened by pursuit, casualties, and repeated attacks. The battle lasted for hours. This was not one dramatic cavalry charge followed by collapse. William's army had to attack again and again. Archers fired, infantry climbed, knights charged. The English resisted. The dead accumulated before the ridge. William reportedly lost several horses beneath him, a sign of how close he came to the fighting and how dangerous the battle remained. Harold's army had already demonstrated extraordinary endurance. Many of its men had fought in the north weeks earlier. Others had joined during the march. They now held a defensive position from morning into the late day against an army able to rotate forms of attack. But endurance carried a cost. Every dead housecarl weakened the professional core of the line. Every man drawn downhill created another gap. Every hour reduced strength and coordination. The Normans had more tactical options for sustaining pressure. The English had one essential task: remain together. If you want more forgotten conflicts where the future of a kingdom depended on a single formation holding until darkness, subscribe to Ashes of Empire. Sometimes history turns when a line loses only a few feet of ground. Norman archers were used again later in the battle. A later tradition claims that they were ordered to shoot high, so arrows would fall behind or above the shield wall. Contemporary evidence for that exact command is weak, and the famous story that Harold was struck in the eye by an arrow remains uncertain. The Bayeux tapestry shows a figure pulling an arrow from his face, beside another figure being cut down by a mounted warrior under an inscription announcing that King Harold was killed. It is not certain whether these images depict two stages of Harold's death, two separate men, or a later alteration to the embroidery. Other sources describe Harold being killed by Norman knights. We cannot know exactly how the king died. We know what his death did. Harold was the center of the English defense. His banner marked command, legitimacy, and the position around which his best warriors gathered. Once he and his brothers Gurth and Leofwine were dead, the English army lost both political and military leadership. The remaining shield wall began to collapse. Some English warriors continued fighting around the royal standard. Others fled. The Normans pursued as darkness approached. One group of fleeing Englishmen reportedly turned on their pursuers at a place later called the Malfosse, or Evil Ditch, inflicting losses when Norman riders entered broken ground. Even in defeat, resistance continued, but the battle was decided. William held the field. Harold's body had to be identified among the dead, though stories differ on how this was done. One tradition says Edith Swanisha, a woman closely associated with Harold, recognized him by marks on his body. The details may belong more to later memory than secure evidence. The political fact was undeniable. England no longer had a living crowned king capable of leading resistance. Yet William was not king simply because he had won at Hastings. The English elite quickly chose Edgar the Atheling, a young descendant of the old royal line, as king. London remained outside Norman control. Powerful earls such as Edwin and Morcar still commanded support. William had destroyed Harold's army, but he had not destroyed England's ability to resist. The conquest now moved from battlefield victory to political pressure. William advanced cautiously. Rather than assault London directly at once, he moved through the surrounding regions, taking towns, cutting communications, and demonstrating that further resistance would bring devastation. Norman forces moved through Kent and around the capital. English leaders began to submit. William was crowned king in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. Even the coronation reflected the fear of conquest. When those inside the church shouted acclamation, Norman guards outside mistook the noise for rebellion and set nearby buildings on fire. The ceremony continued while smoke and panic surrounded the abbey. William had the crown. He still had to conquer the kingdom. Rebellions erupted over the following years. Resistance appeared in the west, the Midlands, East Anglia, and the north. Edgar the Atheling remained a potential focus. Danish fleets returned. Local leaders attempted to exploit Norman weakness. Hereward the Wake became associated with resistance in the Fenlands, though later legend expanded his role. William answered with castles and force. The Normans constructed motte and bailey castles across England. Some were built rapidly from earth and timber. Others later became stone fortresses. These castles housed garrisons, dominated roads and towns, protected Norman lords, and served as visible instruments of occupation. England had fortifications before 1066, but the scale and political purpose of Norman castle building transformed the landscape. A castle announced that conquest was no longer passing through. It intended to remain. The most devastating repression came in the north. In 1069 and 1070, after repeated rebellion and Danish intervention, William launched the campaign remembered as the Harrying of the North. Norman forces destroyed crops, settlements, livestock, and supplies across large areas. The exact scale and later descriptions are debated, but the devastation was severe. Famine followed. Communities suffered long after the military resistance was broken. The conquest of England was not completed only by knights at Hastings. It was completed through terror, dispossession, administration, and starvation. The Old English aristocracy was gradually removed. Men who had held land under Edward and Harold were killed, dispossessed, exiled, or reduced. William distributed estates to Norman and other continental followers. By the time of the Domesday Survey in 1086, much of England's landed wealth was controlled by a new elite. Bishops and abbots were also replaced by men connected to the Norman world. The change was extraordinary. A relatively small conquering class took control of one of the most organized kingdoms in Western Europe. They did not erase the English population. Most farmers, laborers, villagers, and townspeople remained. Existing systems of taxation, local administration, and royal authority were often preserved because they were useful. The Normans conquered a sophisticated state and then used its machinery. This combination gave the new monarchy unusual power. William inherited Anglo-Saxon institutions while imposing Norman lordship above them. Royal government could draw on English taxation and record-keeping. Norman castles and land grants tied powerful lords to the conquest. The result was not a complete replacement of everything that had existed, but a violent fusion of English structures with Norman rulers. The language of power changed. The majority of the population continued speaking forms of Old English, but the court, aristocracy, and much of elite culture became French-speaking. Latin remained central to church and administration. Over generations, these languages interacted. Thousands of French words entered English, especially in law, government, war, food, status, and culture. The English language survived the conquest. But it emerged, changed. The effects can still be heard in pairs of words shaped by class and occupation. Animals tended by English-speaking peasants and meats named in the French-speaking households that consumed them. Older Germanic terms existing beside French words for government, justice, nobility, and authority. Hastings did not create modern English overnight. It placed English inside the conditions that would transform it. The conquest also redirected England's foreign relationships. Before 1066, the kingdom had been deeply connected to Scandinavia and the North Sea world. Norman rule tied England more closely to France, especially Normandy. English kings now held lands on both sides of the Channel. Disputes over those continental territories would shape centuries of warfare. The Plantagenet Empire, the loss of Normandy, conflicts with French kings, and eventually the 100 Years' War all belonged partly to the political world opened by the Norman Conquest. England did not become isolated after Hastings. It became entangled in continental Europe more deeply than before. The church changed as well. Norman bishops reorganized dioceses, rebuilt cathedrals in Romanesque style, and strengthened ties with continental reform movements. Monasteries were founded or transformed. Church councils changed discipline and administration. Yet the conquest also used religious institutions to legitimize foreign rule. William founded Battle Abbey near the battlefield, traditionally with its high altar marking the place where Harold fell. The abbey served as memorial, religious foundation, and perhaps an act of penance. It transformed the killing ground into a sacred monument to Norman victory. Memory itself became part of conquest. Ashes of Empire follows the battles and invasions that replaced ruling classes, redrew kingdoms, and left consequences far beyond the field. Subscribe to keep exploring the wars that history still carries in language, stone, and inherited power. Hastings has often been remembered as a simple contest between English infantry and Norman cavalry. The reality was more balanced. The English shield wall was effective. It resisted repeated attacks for most of the day. Harold's choice of defensive ground was sound. If the formation had remained intact until darkness, William might have faced an impossible position. His supply situation was not limitless. His fleet lay behind him. A failed battle could have destroyed his claim and encouraged rivals at home. William's victory was therefore not inevitable. His army adapted. It combined missile troops, infantry, and cavalry. William maintained command during moments of panic. He survived repeated exposure in battle. Norman forces exploited English pursuit and gradually weakened the defensive line. Harold also made rational choices under terrible pressure. He could not know exactly how long he should wait in London. Allowing William to devastate southern England carried political and economic cost. Harold had already shown at Stamford Bridge that speed and aggression could destroy an invader before consolidation. The same instinct that saved England in the north may have brought him too quickly into battle in the south. But calling Harold merely reckless ignores the scale of the crisis. He had been king for less than a year. He faced 2 major invasions within weeks. He defeated one of the most feared warriors in Europe. Then he marched to meet another claimant before the kingdom had time to breathe. Hastings was not simply Harold's failure. It was the final pressure of an almost impossible year. The battle changed England because William's victory was followed by a complete transformation of ownership and authority. Other conquerors had ruled England before. Knut, the Danish king, had taken the crown in the 11th century, but he governed partly through existing English elites and became ruler of a wider North Sea empire. William's conquest replaced the ruling class more thoroughly. The people who owned the land changed. The men who built castles changed. The language spoken at court changed. The direction of royal ambition changed. The identity of England did not disappear, but it was reassembled beneath foreign rule. This is why the conquest cannot be reduced to the famous image of Harold with an arrow in his eye. That image captures one uncertain moment. The true transformation came afterward. In legal claims, land surveys, fortified towns, new monasteries, displaced families, crushed rebellions, and the daily reality of serving lords whose ancestors had crossed the Channel with William. For ordinary people, the conquest was experienced locally. A new castle above a town, a new lord controlling an estate, a new language spoken by officials, a rebellion followed by burned fields, a church rebuilt in a foreign architectural style, taxes recorded under a king who had arrived as an invader. These changes accumulated until the England before 1066 became increasingly difficult to recover. Yet continuity survived beneath conquest. English law influenced Norman government. English administrative divisions remained useful. The shires, royal writs, taxation systems, and established patterns of local authority were not casually discarded. William needed them. The conquerors became rulers of England by using parts of the state they had defeated. Over time, their descendants ceased to be simply Norman outsiders. They became part of England. That process took generations and was never peaceful in its origin. But it reveals the paradox of conquest. William changed England profoundly. England also changed the people who conquered it. By the 13th century, the descendants of Norman lords increasingly understood England as their own kingdom. The languages mixed. Political communities developed. New conflicts reshaped identity. The invaders' dynasty became part of the national past. But the violence at the beginning remained. The scale of Hastings is therefore not only the hours of fighting on Senlac Hill. It is the centuries that followed. A disputed succession brought an invasion fleet. The invasion produced one decisive battle. The battle enabled a new ruling class. That ruling class reshaped England's language, aristocracy, architecture, warfare, church, and continental politics. Few battlefields can claim a longer shadow. The Bayeux Tapestry preserves that shadow in thread. Edward's death, Harold's coronation, the comet seen as an omen, Norman ships, horses crossing the sea, soldiers foraging, a feast before battle, cavalry charges, fallen men, and finally Harold's death and English flight. But even that remarkable work ends before the conquest was complete. It shows the victory. It cannot show every village that later submitted, every family that lost land, every castle razed, every revolt crushed, or every word that crossed from French into English over the generations. The true tapestry of conquest was larger than the surviving cloth. On October 14th, 1066, Harold's shield wall stood between England and a future no one on the ridge could fully imagine. The men around him were not fighting to preserve a museum image of Anglo-Saxon England. They were defending their king, their land, their families, their obligations, and the political world they knew. Across the field, William's men fought for loyalty, land, wealth, absolution, and the promise that victory could make foreign claims real. Both armies understood that retreat would change everything. Only one was right. When Harold fell, England did not end. Its transformation began. William's victory opened the road to Westminster, but also to northern devastation, dispossession, castles, Domesday, continental war, and a new language of power. The kingdom that emerged remained England, yet almost every institution at its summit belonged to a different ruling world. Hastings deserves to be remembered not as a romantic duel between two kings, but as the violent hinge between two Englands. Before it stood a kingdom shaped by Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian history, ruled by native earls, and connected deeply to the North Sea. After it came a kingdom ruled by Norman lords, tied to France, fortified by castles, recorded with extraordinary administrative power, and pushed toward centuries of continental ambition. The change was not immediate, it was not peaceful, and it was not confined to one battlefield. But it began where the shield wall broke. As darkness settled over the ridge, William had won a field, but not yet a kingdom. Harold lay dead among the men who had defended him. English survivors disappeared into the woods and roads. Norman soldiers remained beneath standards that had crossed the sea only weeks earlier. Ahead of them stood resistance, rebellion, famine, coronation, and conquest. Behind them stood the Channel and the world they had left. On that autumn evening, England still existed, but the England that had entered the battle was gone.